Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello and Yali Madad. My name is Anar Amin, and I have the privilege to serve as a moderator for today's Critical Conversation. The Critical Conversation series has been conceived as an ITREB USA initiative aimed at engaging the entire Jamaat, but with a focus on 18 to 40-year-olds. The series aims to explore the critical conversations and questions of our time within the context of our faith. Before we begin, I would like to read a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgements are formal statements that seek to recognize and respect Indigenous peoples as original stewards of their land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. We do this to express gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on and to honor the Indigenous people who have been living with and caring for their lands from time immemorial. Recognizing them also means acknowledging the historical and ongoing genocide of Indigenous peoples and the ways in which we benefit from and perpetuate violence towards Indigenous peoples. Naming the original and current stewards of the land we live on is a first step towards making reparations. I reside in Dallas, Texas, and acknowledge that this area is a home of and traditional lands for many Indigenous peoples, including the Caddo, Wichita, the Tawakoni, and the Kickapoo, as well as the tribes that may have lived here and roamed the area, including Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache. We believe the work we do in sessions like these is part of our responsibility to acknowledge and address the ongoing harm to Indigenous peoples. It is part of our work towards a society that is more just, equitable, and in keeping with our ethics as Ismaili Muslims. Our session today will be a book talk exploring the Prophet's Heir, the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, with the author Dr. Hassan Abbas, as we discuss the life of Imam Ali, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, may peace be upon him, his teachings and values, and unpacks his legacy over the Muslim world. During this session, you will see a question and answer box where you can share additional questions and thoughts during the presentation. We will try our best to address as many questions submitted during today's talk as we can. With that, I am honored to introduce you to our wonderful speaker for today's session, Dr. Hassan Abbas. Dr. Hassan Abbas is a distinguished professor of international relations at the Near East South Asia Strategic Studies Center, National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He serves as a senior advisor at Project on Shiism and Global Affairs at Harvard University's School of Divinity. And his current research work focuses on building narratives for countering political and religious extremism and rule of law reforms in developing states. Previously, he served as a professor and chair of the Department of Regional and Analytical Studies at National Defense University's College of International Security Affairs in Washington, D.C. He's also a senior advisor at the Asia Society. Previously, Dr. Abbas served as professor and department chair at the National Defense University's College of International Security Affairs and as the distinguished Qaid-e-Azam professor at Columbia University. He has held fellowships at Harvard Law School's Islamic Legal Studies program and program on negotiation, the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, Asia Society in New York as a Bernard Schwartz Fellow, and as a Carnegie Fellow at the New America Foundation. He holds a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, an LLM in International Law from Nottingham University, United Kingdom, and a Master's of Arts in Political Science from Punjab University, Pakistan. Before we get started, I would like to note that the views of our speaker expressed during the course of the discussion are their own. So let us turn to our conversation. Thank you, Dr. Abbas, for joining us today. It's truly an honor to have you.
So kind of you. I'm truly honored as well. Looking forward to our conversation. Very grateful.
Wonderful. So as we begin, my very first question is, can you please share what prompted you to write this book and why did you choose the title Prophet's Heir? And if you can also add on, what do you hope the readers will take away from this book? And especially for those in the 18 to 14-year-old age group like me, how is Imam Ali's life relatable to the world today?
Thank you so much. As to why I wrote this book, I think this was a book in the making for a very long time. This is linked to one's personal inspiration. The moment the word Ya Ali, and when you said Ya Ali Madad, when you hear these words, something happens in your heart. So it's a matter of heart, let me put it like that. So that was the inspiration, but the way it happened was a bit unexpected. I was thinking hard about um, my next book after my previous books, which are all on security issues. And I'm a professor, I'm a political scientist, focuses on international relations, but primarily on security studies. So I had a few books on nuclear proliferation, religious extremism, political tensions in South Asia. And I was thinking of the new book. And without any attempt to say that I am in any way spiritually elevated, I want to be, but I was in Saudi Arabia and Medina, and it happened to be the last few days of Ramadan. And I was praying for guidance. What should I work on my next projects? An idea came to my mind on to write something on sectarianism and how to defeat sectarianism. So this I always thought of Imam Ali alayhi salam's name as a bridge builder, as someone who everyone has respect for. Lo and behold, just then from Saudi Arabia, went to London for a trip. My daughter was then studying there, and I had a chance to meet my editor for a different reason, editor of a former book. And they asked me about biographies. And in passing, I mentioned that it's great to have the biography of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but good that we have many in the market now. We need to think about other personalities. And she said, Heather McCallum, she's now the executive editor of Yale University Press. She said, for example, whose biography you are referring to? I couldn't, without even thinking, I said, Ali ibn Abi Talib. And she said, who was Ali? And I explained in detail. And by the time I ended, she said, can you write his biography? And my first reaction was, I'm not qualified to, because I'm a political scientist. I'm not a professor of, or scholar of Islamic studies. But she said, but you seems to be inspired the way. And she said, can you tell me one sentence why this book would interest ordinary people, ordinary Americans, Westerners? And I said, at that time, 2017, 16, Daesh was creating havoc. And I said, if Ali ibn Abi Talib's worldview had become predominant, you would not have seen groups like Daesh today. And I think that got her a deep interest. So that was why it happened. The purpose was, and the second part is more from my three daughters who helped me frame the issues. This COVID had started, and when they saw my kind of first draft, one of my daughters read it, Zahra, and she said, Baba, you have always tried to inspire us throughout your life on Imam Ali, but the way you have written this is too academic, it's boring. I said, oh, really? We discarded that first draft. And during COVID, it became a family project. Every evening, every lunch hour, every dinner, watch a documentary, watch a lecture, sit together, discuss it. And being from different religious backgrounds, myself from a background of father Isna Ashri Shia, mother a Sunni, my wife from a Sunni Sufi school of thought. So we, on every point, we had debate. So this was ultimately turned out to be a book focused for young generation, young Muslims, young Shias, young Sunnis, young people from all faiths. So that's the short story. Why Prophet's Heir? To be short, I know I'm taking long to answer, but just setting the stage. This was a book, I wrote it as the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib. My editor read it, and she came back to me and said, Hassan, the title we have picked is The Prophet's Heir. By that time, I was wanted to be a little politically correct, little neutral. I said, really? Why you say The Prophet's Heir? She said, because I've read the manuscript, and that's what I've learned. Ali was Prophet's Heir. I said, wow, if it's so obvious to you, then that's the title. That's the story.
That's amazing. And I love that. I love that this was a family project and that you are surrounded by wonderful women in your life to tell you to tell you to do it for the younger
I'm outvoted by 4-1.
That's how it should be. Yeah. So the approach, Dr. Abbas, you take to this book is through centering a history that seems to have been erased or even untold over the centuries. Why do you think this history was masked, and how should we be rethinking the history of Islam that we receive?
I think that is the real tragedy in terms of how historical misappropriations, manipulation, distortion of history is something that defines Islamic history today, not only as regards to Hazrat Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'minin, but also because on so many other aspects. This famous book, I'm forgetting the author's name. I think it is Jonathan Brown, if I'm right. On It is about misquoting the Prophet or misinterpreting some of his thoughts. And so other scholars have also. There's a scholar, Nabil Hussain, who has recently published an outstanding book in US as well, which explains how the historically different segments of scholars, politicians. We know Umayyads for sure. They were the leading figures who in their own rivalry between Banu Umayyah, which means think Muawiyah, Yazid, and their family, and their hostility towards Bani Hashim with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Hazrat Abu Talib and everyone else in the family. That was so entrenched that they were always trying to compete and offer competing narratives. Now, the hadith of the Prophet was so clear and so powerful that it was extremely difficult for them to challenge it. So they tried to create doubts. I'll just mention one, the most famous Ghadir khutbah. We know, Man kuntum mawla fahaza aliyun mawla. The Prophet said, whosoever considers me as master, Ali is his master as well. There were about 110, some people think more, of the companions of the Prophet in that event who narrated this. By my count, this is, and I again I must mention, I'm not a religious scholar in the sense that I'm not trained in that field, but for this book and other works, I had to go deep into these issues. There's no other hadith which has so many first generation of companions who are quoting that hadith. So this was so obvious, but still, there was an event. As an anecdote mentioning this. This was in London, a group of a SWAS group of Muslim students. There was this very smart guy. Maybe he's watching or hearing this, or he will, and he can correct me. But he interviewed me on the book, and afterwards he shared with me that he said that I discussed this Man kuntu mawla fahaza aliyun mawla with some friends and extended family, friends, others. And he said, I got a pushback by people saying, do you think this is hadith? We have not heard about it. And he said, I pushed back and I said, no, I've checked it out after this book. This is a famous hadith. So the point I'm making is, this hadith, as famous as the Ghadir Khum lecture, this was now hidden in so many other ways within the historical context. So this historical manipulation is so severe, and that it has taken away, in some cases, the core messages of Islam. Or at least you really have to dig deep into that. So that's why I thought that, and I was forced to. Imam Ali could not be understood. Even I would argue that the life of the Prophet cannot be understood the way historical manipulations have happened. That's why, to begin with, it was supposed to be and required to be a project of history and history reading and understanding history.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's also like historical literacy that we have to pay attention to. It's whose history are you reading? Whose her story are you missing, or should you be reading? Dr. Abbas, in your book, you highlighted several examples of Imam Ali making political decisions to preserve or work towards the unity of the community. Why do you think the unity of the community was paramount to the Imam?
Excellent question. I think it was. And this is a point that is missed out on all sides. And if I can, if anyone asked me about my religious identity, I would say first a Muslim, second a Muslim, third a Muslim. Then I will go into, okay, I have mixed background, or a Shia or a Sufi or a Sunni. And that's why it is important. The reason was that all these sacrifices that Imam gave, and even his family gave, were in an effort to keep people together or to bring them together. It was so easy for Imam Ali to have reacted in either a fashion through use of force, or by going out to people and making his case very, very strongly. We have some evidence that at certain points Imam Ali had mentioned, even at the time when Saqifa had happened. Saqifa, for everyone, I'm sure they know, but this is the time at the moment the Prophet passed away, and there was this political decision making to pick the next caliph. Imam Ali probably knew, or somebody must have reached out to him as well. Going to that political meeting where it was decided who's the caliph mattered nothing for Ali. And I have come to this conclusion that even becoming the caliph, which is now the matter of dispute between Shias and Sunnis and everyone else, it mattered so little to Imam Ali whether he was a caliph or not. He has said this in Nahjul Balagha in so many places, where saying what is the value in his eyes about the political office. What mattered though was his status as the Imam, and no one could take that away from him. This has to be emphasized and understood. Yes, Imam was a victim. There were issues. His political rights were taken away, and he was very clear on that. He never minced words. He said categorically to the first caliph, Abu Bakr, when he came to him and he challenged Ali, why are you think you have the right? And Imam Ali said, well, in Saqifa and later on, you have made a case that you are the most deserving of the persons for this post because you were closest to the Prophet. You know that you were not the closest. And the Caliph Abu Bakr, according to Sunni Hadith, started crying. I mean, I give some credit to Abu Bakr as well. He was honest, and he started crying means he knew he had committed a mistake. But Imam Ali never went further. He never embarrassed anyone. Yes, he kept on saying at different points, it is my right. But the purpose was keeping the people together. And later on as well, when he became the caliph, the first thing he could have done, and I'm going into a kind of controversial arena, but that's should be fine. That's why we want to unravel or unearth or understand and interpret history. The first decision could have been, okay, who are the guys who were against me on Saqifa? Who took away my rights? For him, it never mattered who was for him or against him. Whatever mattered for him was justice. Who's on the path of equity and justice? And at the same time, he could have said, okay, where is the Father clan? Who owns it? Okay, bring the keys to me or whatever. He never did that. So Imam Ali wanted, why all this happened? Because of this burning desire and task as an Imam. His task was not to divide. It was to bring people together. I have so many quotes in mind, but if there's one larger message of Imam Ali that becomes obvious to us, it is when someone asked him about the worldview, and he said, people are of two kinds. Either they are your brother in faith or your brother in humanity. That's the only distinction Imam Ali is talking about, and that is even not a distinction. He's bringing even the non-Muslims and everyone else together. How he could have been the one who would have liked Muslims to be divided in so many groups and at each other's throat. Having a division, having a difference of opinion is all fine. We have to be tolerant and respectful, but to be at each other's throat, that is what Islam was against. And Imam Ali was the biggest, I would say, the flag bearer of this idea. And today, people think of Imam Ali and immediately think, oh, are you a Shia? You have written a book on Imam Ali, you are a Shia? What do you mean by that? You're a Shia. Imam Ali is the one who reflected the teachings, the ideals, the mannerism, the character of the Prophet like no one else did. And that is his primary identity. That identity brings everyone together the way the Prophet had brought everyone together.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dr. West. You're right. I think a lot of individuals forget that Ali's understanding and closeness to the Prophet also helps us to understand Islam in general and not just bucket each other in, like, the different Sunni, Shia, or Sufi buckets. Speaking of justice and equity, Dr. West, I had a question. Your book argues that the legacy of Imam Ali is a continuation of an intellectual, embodied continuation of the Prophet's message of justice and equity and creating systems that tackle oppression and support the disenfranchised. Can you provide some examples of how Imam Ali's works towards justice and equity were displayed?
Thank you so much. This is became obvious to me through reading of Nahjul Balagha. And that's also another challenging thing. I was looking at the Twitter debate just yesterday among some Pakistani friends. I have a friend, Raza Rumi, who runs a blog as well, a famous writer. And he was debating that and he had to qualify in his tweet up front that we had many copies of Nahjul Balagha at home, and in bracket, Sunni home. And he wrote, and he said, and it was all fine to study and quote. And he said, now as soon as you mention Najib Balagha, people immediately think of that it must be a Shia house. The reason I'm mentioning this is many Shias actually they like we keep Quran normally as a decoration piece. Sorry to say, we keep all religious books in that fashion. We think there's to have that book is enough of a blessing. And while I'm on this, just a short anecdote. Recently, one of the religious scholars came to my home, and we have a small prayer room in the home, like the traditional South Asian way, and in other ways as well. And he saw a Quran in a beautiful cover, which I think brought from a religious, I think probably from Iran many decades ago. And he said, "So Hassan, this Quran that is within in this beautiful box, do you open and read?" I said, "No, Sayyid, we have so many Quran Hakim here on this shelf." He said, "No, no, no. Have you?" He said, "There we have quotations on this. Keeping the Quran in a box and not opening it means you have imprisoned the Quran. So once in a while, take it out and read it." And he was mentioning religious references to it. Coming to this, my point on directly answering your question, Najil Balagha, if you read it, every second page you'll find, or third page, you'll find some reference to either justice and equity or the rights of the oppressed. It the document comes out, if I may say that. I mean, in a sense, the manifesto of communism, in a different sense, the rights of the people. So often, when Imam Ali took oath or took charge of the position as caliph, his first statement was a reflection of this idea, and I'll just quote it. He made it very clear in a sentence. Number one, he said, "I neither sought power as an end in itself." This is the answer to our previous question also. He said, "I neither sought power as an end in itself, nor to benefit personally in any way. I want to restore true symbols of Islam, usher in prosperity, secure peace, so that oppressed have no fear." Everything he said was then focused on the point, so that oppressed have no fear. There's no other definition of justice, beautiful definition of justice than this point. Many a times there was this one famous case where he found an old man on the street who happened to be a Christian. And Imam Ali he realized that he's very old and he can't earn, and that's why he was poor and he had nothing to eat. Imam Ali addressed the people surrounding him and said, you made best use of this person's energy and youth when he was young, and now that he's old, you're not taking care of him. He never said because he's a Muslim, he's part of my community, or he was my Shia or something like that. Because he was a Christian, and he emphasized that point. Also, during his final statements, which probably if I'll get a chance later on to read some of those excerpts, every other major speech or other statement or other letter that he mentioned, the reference to equity and justice. His most famous statement on saying that abandoning equity and justice is a path to oppression and authoritarianism. I remember this was a quote. It used to be on the title of one of the famous newspapers in South Asia at one time. Very categorical, very clear understanding of even modern day politics, you would see. My last quote on this is on equity and justice. I've tested this idea of using Imam Ali's quotes in my teaching, and often without mentioning that it was Imam Ali alayhi salam's quote, I would ask students, okay, who do you think said this? And they would say Socrates. Then they would say, oh, maybe it was Thomas Jefferson. And I said, no, none of them. It was Ali ibn Abi Talib. And people get surprised. And this is another tragedy, that we have not projected Imam Ali's legacy as the one which is totally surrounding justice. I must add, I mean, there's some outstanding books of Mr. Raza Kazimi also, which talk about, which are actually built around the idea of Imam Ali through the lens of justice. So the scholars have been focused on this, but ordinary Muslims, I think they miss out in this point completely. So thank you for asking this.
Yeah, and just going back on your Najil Balagha point, and for the audience, Najil Balagha is translated as a peak of eloquence. It's a collection of Imam Ali's sayings and writings. So for those of you that haven't had a chance to pick it up, please do. There's lots of different translations out there as well. In one part of your book, Dr. Abbas, Imam Ali wrote a letter, you mentioned through the Nahj Balagha, Imam Ali wrote a letter to Malik al-Ashtar, who was the former general of the army in Imam Ali's command, appointed governor in Egypt. And this letter was one of governance and guidance, and is one that continues to influence others around the world. I think we also use it in some of our classes, and we have the students go through it and say, what guidance do you think you would like as a 14-year-old? Could you share your thoughts and reflections on this letter? How is this letter an example of Imam Ali's integrating faith into life?
Thank you so much. This is such a natural question after the previous one. I remember the first time actually reading it in detail, and a very good translation, which I'm still looking for. I have the original booklet somewhere. I had joined the government service in Pakistan. I'm talking about 1991, but actually it was before that. I was a student in Lahore. And Benazir Bhutto became the Prime Minister of Pakistan. One of the first things she did was she asked the Speaker of the National Assembly then, 1988, to distribute the copy of the letter of Imam Ali to Malik al-Ashtar to every member of the parliament. And I still remember it was a beautiful green color booklet. And I read it then. And I was so amazed because I was a student of political science. And I probably quoted from it a lot in my political science paper at that time, because it was so surprising. It seemed, I remember this feeling that, is this, somebody has converted this into modern language or modern ideas? And I learned, no, it was exactly how it was. And if you read that letter, it seems as if this at one level is a document about the role of judges, about the appointment of judges, about how judges or judiciary should be an independent pillar. I often say to this my students, this idea of separation of powers that we often credit to Montesquieu or Rousseau, Montesquieu primarily, in a modern historical sense, saying that this idea that judiciary, executive, and legislature operate independently and as a check on each other. This is an idea from the American Constitution or from Montesquieu. No, this was so clearly defined by Imam Ali in this letter to Malik al-Ashtar. And there are no two versions or three versions of the letter, to the best of my knowledge. There's a consensus among everyone that this is the letter and this is the text. And this letter says a judge has to be independent, and judge should not be answerable to the caliph. And the caliph should have nothing to do with the proceedings of the court. Also, tax collection. You'll be surprised. I mean, one or two just ideas that I'll mention. When I read this, that Imam Ali said to the tax collector, you're not supposed to go and knock on someone's door in a harsh manner. Or that if you knock on the door and the person comes out and you'll say, this is what you owe to the state on tax, and the person says, no, I don't. He says, accept that. And he said, if you have an argument or a debate, take the person out of that place away to a third neutral place, so that your argumentation is not kind of painful for his family, friends, and others. You'll be amazed how much Imam Ali was always concerned about the rights of the people. He also mentioned that never distribute, and this I mentioned to some of these developing nations, he said that never distribute any land acquired through military campaigns to the generals. Because if you are going to do that, then they will one, not pay taxes. Secondly, they will use that opportunity going to war, thinking that the land will actually come to them. So the idea of equity and justice, the way it was explained in letter to Malik al-Ashtar is amazing. One tragic part, though, the two tragedies linked to this. One is, and I asked this to many friends, a very dear friend of mine, an accomplished scholar, wrote a book on Imam Ali and governance, not Imam Ali and governance, Islam and governance. I hurriedly looked at the index saying, okay, he must have quoted Malik al-Ashtar. It is a leading scholar and a leading publisher. And I couldn't find him. I couldn't find any reference to it. I kept on thinking why we often miss out on these things. The reason is that in the Sunni tradition, with all the tremendous respect for the Sunni school of thought, I would say, their scholars have developed an entrenched bias against the name of Malik al-Ashtar. because they think, many of them think, not on the Sunni side, I should qualify, it's more of this extreme groups or Salafis or Wahhabis or that school of thought who believe and in what Usman had said at that time, and Muawiyah actually, to be correct, Muawiyah had said at that time that, oh, look, this Malik al-Ashtar is involved in the murder or assassination of Usman, the third caliph of Islam, and which was not true at all, absolutely. But they have developed such an animosity towards the name of Malik al-Ashtar that they say anything with Malik al-Ashtar's name, even if that is a treatise or that is a document on something entirely different. Malik al-Ashtar never could even take this document and implement it because he was assassinated on his path on his way to Egypt. But look at how biases are internalized, and that leads to us being cut off and divorced from scholarship. The last point, the tragedy thing I mentioned, because as you were mentioning, Anar, to our audience that they should read this book. Another tragedy is that we still are waiting for a really good translation of Nahjul Balagha in English. There are some good. I don't want to take credit away from people. I know one of them is through an extended family we've done, but they are South Asians. Their first language is Urdu, Punjabi, or Gujarati, or some other languages. And the real good translation we are still waiting for. I had mentioned this in a recent conference in Iraq, which was on future of Shiism. And I tried to kind of shame some of those big donors who had come from Gulf and Middle East and everywhere else. I said, you keep on building these big mosques and Imam Bargahs and religious centers. Why are you not investing in scholarship? And at least a good translation from someone whose first language is English or who can write in English in a way that will inspire people, like this book, for the lack of any other words. A lot of work from the Ismaili Institute also, which I'll want to talk about later on. The study of Quran recently by Sayyid Hussain Nasser and a group, which is written in a language which, if I'm a Westerner, I can read it and I will see, oh, this is in a language that is accessible to me. When I mentioned this in a conference, even in Baghdad recently, somebody mentioned that Professor Tahira Qutbuddin at Chicago University, an amazing scholar, that she is actually doing this. I think that will be the best one. I heard a group in London is also doing it. But the point is 1400 years, and Shias are not short of resources, and Sunnis neither. And none of them could really invest in an outstanding international standard translation of Nahjul Balagha. It's shameful. Sorry.
No apologies needed. I think it's a good call out to invest more in scholarship. And the Nahjul Balagha is such a treasure trove of empathy as well, and love and light that you may want to even just embody in your day-to-day life. And I think everybody should have access to those words. Dr. Abbas, in your book, you also, you've done a lot of research. Obviously, this is a family affair, and you saw documentaries and you read and debriefed with your family. You shared some of Henry Corbin's research on Imam Ali and his own description of like securing and writing down the divine revelations. He says, not a single verse of the Quran descended upon and was revealed to the messenger of God, which he did not proceed to dictate to me and make me recite. I would write it down with my own hand, and he would instruct me as to its tafsir, the literal explanation, and the ta'wil, the spiritual exegesis. So, Dr. Abbas, how does this saying help us understand the closeness that Imam Ali had to the spirit of the Quran?
What a beautiful quote that is, and what an amazing man he was. I think prayers for his in the next world, that he gets real reward for the contribution he has done. Reading Henry Corbin at times is difficult because of his very academic language, but in other places also it's so inspiring and it's so powerful. And I'm often, when I was, and I mentioned it in the book as well, one of his famous sentences, he said the Wilaya of Ali had converted a religion of law into religion of love. So he said something to this effect. And I said, wow, what a way to explain Wilaya and the love of Ahlul Bayt. The contribution that Henry Corbin has done to this field, and to all of us, we are all indebted to him. And this quote that you have mentioned, I think this says it all. if Muslims really know this hadith, and this is a very authentic hadith from main sources, from multiple sources, no one would ever dare compare any companion to Ali. And we are not saying, we are not supposed to say bad things about anyone, any caliph or anyone. They were all very important people. They had all acted according to their own wisdom. One of us leading Sunni scholar had once said to me from Pakistan, is if I'll get a chance, because it's a very inspiring story. If I get a chance later on, I'll mention. But he, in his book called Masnavi Maula Ali, he's a Sunni writer. He says that I have concluded that those who somehow or the other history pits them against Imam Ali in a historical sense, it was their lack of understanding and lack of knowledge, maybe other than Muawiyah, who I'm not ready to give any benefit of doubt, because of his deceit and his arrogance and his animosity and his family's animosity against Islam. No benefit at all to him. But others you can give that they lack the kind of wisdom and knowledge and insight into really understanding who was Ali. The point from this quote is that Imam Ali, few people know, and I actually, to be honest, learned this fact while researching for this book, that we always hear and read that Imam Ali alayhi salam was very close to the Prophet from age 10, 8 or 10, although we know that when he was born and Bibi Fatima bint Asad brought him outside the door of Kaaba, it was the Prophet who was the first one to hold him, and only then Imam Ali opened his eyes. But we often think of Imam Ali really got under the guidance and teaching of the Prophet when he was 7 or 8 at that age. But the reality is, when I read it, that when the Prophet used to go to the cave of Hira, Ghar Hira, for his prayers and for his spiritual excellence and dialogue and conversations with the Lord, he used to be accompanied with two people, Bibi Khatija and Hazrat Ali. So Ali used to walk with the Prophet, even as a small child, to Hira. He was with the Prophet at every occasion, and that's what his claim was, which no one has been able to challenge. Imam Ali saying that I know exactly what you have quoted. Every verse, its context, what we call Mahalle Waku, how it came about, what was the context, and what was the other layer of understanding of this. And the Prophet was continuously teaching him on these issues. And that's why the whole idea is not these divisions, in so many divisions that we have forced ourselves into. It is about the love of Ahlul Bayt. If anyone asks me, if really someone pushes me, okay, what is your identity in Islam? I said, I would like to take Islam from Ahlul Bayt. And irrespective of then which group or which denomination you belongs to, that is a matter of where you're born. But if the love of Ahlul Bayt, and that what we are inspired is that if we want to really understand what the Prophet said, what God, the divine mission was to convey, Ali and his family were the source of that. Ali was never independent, had an independent source of knowledge, I would argue. And this I have quoted in the book as well. This was one of the leading scholars and a grand Ayatollah who I had a chance to interview many times, Ayatollah Sayyid Sayyidul Hakim. And when I was leaving him before his death, he passed away, God bless his soul. I said, Sayyid, anything final? And I had met secular scholars, Shia scholars, Sunni scholars, many scholars. And in his case, what the most inspiring thing was, a fundamental point, when I asked him, any final thoughts? When I was finalizing the manuscript, he said, don't say anything in the book which gives anyone the impression that Ali had something, knowledge, everything else that was his own. Everything that he had was coming from the Prophet. So believing in Ali, loving Ali is loving the Prophet. And because he was, that's the source of information, knowledge, wisdom was from the Prophet. Ana madinatul ilmi wa aliyin babuha. I am the door of knowledge. I am the city of knowledge, the Prophet said. Ali is the door. Also, in the final moments, if I take a minute more, and I want to quote here, this is, we know that during the very final moments, one thing we hear that the Prophet gave him his own ring. I'm not wearing an aqiq today, but this is Dur-e Najaf. But aqiq is often many lovers of Ahlul Bayt and the Shia wear, and Sunnis used to wear as well, the aqiq ring. We say that this aqiq ring today, actually, if you go in Middle East, I'm going in a different direction, but only for a minute. When people want to judge you, you are wearing an aqiq or a ring, they'll say, oh, the person is a Shia. Whereas Prophet used to wear the ring. So Prophet gave his own ring to Ali, and then something that's why many people they attribute or they associate aqiq with Ali, which is true, but it was Ali was wearing it because the Prophet gave him. The other thing, Prophet said something in his ear in the final moments, and many people said, what was it? And later on they asked Imam Ali, what was that final message? And I read many interpretations of this, and the most beautiful one I quote is from a book on Imam Ali by Professor Raza Kazimi, published by Ismaili Institute. And I want to just read it because this is linked to the idea of the quote of Henry Corbin and the hadith that he quotes. And it says it all, what Ali had, not only from the early years, but the final moment as well. When people asked Imam Ali, what was the final message? He said, this is in the words of Raza Kazimi, which is an amazing choice of words. He taught me, Imam Ali said in his words, he taught me 1,000 he taught me 1,000 gates of knowledge, and each gate opened for me another 1,000 gates. Then he says, the fruit of mystical state of conscience. This was a fruit of a mystical state of consciousness, a spiritual taste of the infinite, revealing the mystery of the inescapable presence of God, and to perfect Ali's knowledge of the relationship between the non-manifest, hidden, and the manifest world. That, unquote, that is the relationship between the Prophet and Ali. So you want to really understand the core message, whether it is mystical, spiritual, worldly, Sharia related, love of the Prophet, the essence of Islam, you follow Ali, and it will lead you to the Prophet's right teachings and the divine message. Sorry for a longish answer, but I thought the question was so powerful, it needed some explanation.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. And I think that goes back to, when you started the talk with the power that Ya Ali Madad gives as well, and just the name of it as well.
So true.
Dr. Abbas, you are surrounded by strong women, and you start off the book with the story of Imam Ali's mother, Fatima bint Asad. And throughout, you spend some time focusing on the untold and not well-known stories of the women in Imam Ali's life. Can you share some of those stories here? Can you tell us more about the role that Hazrat Bibi Fatima al-Zahra has played in the life of Imam Ali, and what has been her legacy?
Absolutely. I mean, there is simply no doubt that without the love, the association, the companionship, and I am convinced the religious discourse between the two, without that, Imam Ali's whole message and whole personality cannot be understood. I think there was with some caution I want to share, that when I was first an anecdote, and then I'll come to this slightly another issue which needs a little caution in the way I want to present it. But the first, this was again, I credit it to my wife Binesh and my daughters, who, when they read the first manuscript, one of my daughters said, Baba, you've written the book as if there was no women around Imam Ali. I said, no, there were. So why is there not a reference? And then I tried to look for books on Bibi Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Imam Ali. And I think Bibi Fatima bint Asad's influence on the Prophet is also huge. I mean, she's the only woman who, when she passed away, and she passed away in Medina. She was part of the migration from Makkah to Medina as well. She was alive till quite late. Even at that, the Prophet gave her his own chadar, or his own chadar to her as a shroud for her funeral. That was the kind of love. He always called her his own mother. And through that, there was influence on Imam Ali, of course, as well, from Bibi Khadija, because the same role was actually played by Bibi Khadija for Ali. The women around Imam Ali and around the Prophet, if I may say that, was fundamental, was of paramount importance and understanding. In reference to Bibi Fatima Zahra, Salamullah alaiha, we often project her either in reference to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, or the first thing we know about her is on Fadak, or of course, we know that the Prophet ﷺ used to stand up in honor of her, which was, this is one of the only things which the Prophet did, but it is not incumbent upon us as in terms of hadith, sunnat Rasul. Otherwise, we are supposed to follow. But how many fathers would stand up for their daughters? There was a reason, because of her significance and her knowledge and her wisdom on every point. History shows us some of the statements and speeches where Bibi Fatima Zahra is addressing Imam Ali. One of them I was planning to quote in the book, but I didn't because it's quite strong. She was, I'll not say hard on Imam Ali, but she was challenging some of his thoughts. And because we often present these great personalities in a way that they were all angels. They were, I mean, in terms of their spiritual excellence, no comparisons. But there were ordinary debates. There were ordinary so many issues that were happening, and they were getting influence from each other. They were each other's strength. So Bibi Fatma Zahra's role was huge. In fact, in some cases, she was supportive of Imam Ali in many not only religious issues but in other administrative affairs as well. This is again an area which is under research. If I may share that, the one thing that has come out of all my research is that the first book was hard to get published by academic press. But once that became a successful book, now being translated in Arabic, its translations are there in 2 translations in Persian. Urdu translation is coming out in few months, inshallah. So my editor asked me, what is the next project? And I said, about biography, let me think. And then of course, I was discussing with the family, and they said, why you had to think about it? It has to be Bibi Fatma Zahra. So that is the next plan and next project. And I went for some interviews. I'll not mention the city, and some very important people that I asked them, I said, look, I'm not a religious scholar per se. I'm a very, very humble student of history and Islam. But the first reading I have done of all the biographies of Bibi Fatma Zahra Salamun Alayha, it tells me something, and I don't know how best to frame it. So that's why I'm seeking forgiveness if I frame it wrong. And I said to him, it seems to me that if Bibi Fatma Zahra was maybe not higher than Imam Ali, she was at least his equal. And he, of course, gave me a strong look, and he said, no, you can't frame it like that. But I said, so let me say, it's so obvious to me that their status and stature and spiritual knowledge and closeness to the Prophet or anything else, to the divine message, is equal. And we have a quote actually also. I'm now forgetting whether the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had said or somebody else that if it was not Ali was not there, there was no one who could have been eligible or equal to be married to Fatima or something. So they were at least equal. And that would tell you, I mean, because history is mostly written by men, all the interpreters are men, translators are men, scholars mostly are men. So the Islamic history and its message has such a male bias, which is entrenched because of this very fact who's writing it. So that's why you miss out on so many things. It is easy still to find so many biographies of all men companions around the Prophet. There were some women. The first martyr of Islam was a woman. And she was mother of one of the most famous Sahabis and close friends of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and others as well. We miss out on those facts. And thank you for this question. It is extremely important that we go deeper into this arena and see the contributions of women from early on. Many of the, I would say, the great Shia personalities and the Imams, their wives were also teaching. I think it was Imam Baqir and Imam Jafar Sadiq. I might be forgetting one of their wives was teaching Islamic law in Madina's madrasa. And there were many others as well, which the history is totally, mainstream history is almost quiet on this. And that's also another kind of tragedy that we are witnessing.
Yeah, this is Dr. Abbas's personal plea and my personal plea. If you're a female in the audience and you're interested in academia and scholarship, please do it. If you need any guidance, you know where to go. Definitely one of us here or the Institute of Ismaili Studies. And with that, I would like for the audience to think about if you have any books or ideas or thoughts or support that you can offer on Hazrat Bibi Fatima with Dr. Abbas, please do that. I think it'll help him in his research and more table conversations with the family. So.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll benefit from this idea and say something. Absolutely. In fact, this is a very important day for me. I'm recently published another book on Taliban, which is a different my field of study. And just actually these days, I am moving all my books, old books from my table. You see a very clear set of books, bookshelf behind me. If you had a way to look at my table, which is there are dozens of books just thrown around. I'm now cleaning these up because I'm bringing from my other shelf all the books on Bibi Fatima, because I'm starting that work now. Any works, any ideas, in any way, the resources, because it's that other challenges that on such books and such ideas, there are very few research resources. That's why I appreciate actually the great work done by Ismaili Institute. And this was not a request. I had even no idea that some of the hosts here have gone to that school. I mentioned them in our previous conversation, and I pleasantly came to know they went there for education. If I can name one institution which is actually really producing great scholarship on these issues, it is Ismaili Institute. God bless them and may give them more opportunities and resources. We need to support the scholars who are working on these issues across the world, especially in languages which are global languages. Because that's the only way the message goes around across the world. So absolutely, you can get my contact details also from hosts, and any thoughts, any conversations, anything you want to discuss, you want to pitch an idea to me, you find something unique on Bibi which is not widely known with a source, I'll be grateful for your support in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abbas. Well, Dr. Abbas, I have one last question, which I think is very important to me, especially being in an intra-faith family as myself. In your book, you spend time exploring the development of the Sunni, Shia, and Sufi communities and their relationship with Imam Ali. Would you be able to share some background here? And I know that the discourse around Imam Ali can be very divisive, and we've seen significant sectarian violence over the years over belief systems related to Imam Ali. And what you've shared in the book is a return to the roots of the history of Imam Ali and how he can actually act as a unifying force between all three communities. But can you elaborate on how and what ways we can make this happen?
Thank you so much. Very thoughtful question. And without a doubt, I mean, as I had mentioned earlier, Imam Ali alayhi salam was the bridge builder, and he still, from the future point of view and the contemporary debates, keeping that in mind, Imam Ali's personality is one which can bring everyone together. I often feel there was a reason when the Prophet had said that the famous hadith, "I'm leaving behind me two things, Quran and my ITREB or Ahl Bayt." And this is also linked to the distortion of history issue. Many of our brothers and sisters among the Sunni Muslims, they believe the hadith to be that I'm leaving behind me two things, Quran and hadith and Sunnah, which is not mentioned in any of the main source Sunni books. All the Sunni mainstream and Shia books have a kind of a consensus to mention that Prophet had said, "I'm leaving behind you two things, Quran and Ahlul Bayt." But then he additionally said, and they will not leave each other, or they will stay together till they meet at Hawz-e Kausar. And there are other quotations of the Prophet who said the Hawz-e Kausar is where Ali will be there. So what I mean to say is, in a futuristic context, it has to be the personality of Imam Ali which brings everyone together. And this is not a new idea by any stretch of imagination. Listen to any Qawwali, the call, the Amir Khusro, and Nizamuddin Awliya. The whole idea of Qawwali comes from call, which is Man kuntu Mawla fahaza Ali Mawla. So all those the Sunni mystics and others who love Imam Ali alayhi salam, can anyone say that no, Imam Ali belongs to this tradition or that tradition, and you have no right? I mean, I have had conversations with the Sunnis. There was a leading Sunni scholar in South Asia, who said to me, he was a mainstream Sunni scholar, and he's in a conversation, Imam Ali, his book research, he said to me, all that is happening to the Muslims in a negative sense, or the problems, challenges, religious extremism, bigotry, in other avenues, the problems they're facing. It is so because the Muslims have not been able to give the real right of Ali to Ali. I said, wow. So I was about to ask him, have you converted to Shiism or something? And then I said, no, he's a proud Sunni. One of the best endorsements I got for the book, one scholar, Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed, who's a professor holding Al-Ghazali chair, and I'm not mentioning it because of my book. I mean, these people, all of you are already greatly supported. So it's not, the purpose is not to sell my book more, although I want all of you to read it. But he said to everyone, this is the main text. Every Muslim should read it. The strongest endorsements came from all Sunnis. That further forced me to think, the love for Imam Ali alayhi salam is already not only alive and kicking, but it's a vibrant thought in many traditions. That's what we need to build on. You will find people among the Shias also who would do great disservice to the idea of Imam and his wilaya by exaggerating things in a way that creates confusion, and take people away from the core message of Tawheed. So the extremists are in all different traditions. What we need is to focus on these core ideas and core people without these ideas of identities, because these are often constructs of our ethnicity, our backgrounds. It is the common ideals that bring us together. Don't challenge or abuse or be negative to anyone based on their sectarian identity. And I know most likely the majority of you here are from the Shia school of thought and Ismaili school of thought. And so I'm saying it to you also, and to others as well, to everyone, Sunnis who are probably not listening, and few will hear, that we should do the same to the other side, what we expect from them. If in normal circumstances, we are not, if we know of someone's friend with a political party, out of respect at times, we're not extremely or severely critical of that political leader, thinking, my friend is a voter of the Liberal Party or Democrats. I'm a Republican. Why should I do that? If we can do that in a personal day-to-day life, if someone respects a different personality, how can you think about being abusive? The whole translations of the ideas of tawalla and tabarra have been misinterpreted in a way which creates more divisions. So I'll be hard on the Shia side here, that being more audience here. We have to be respectful of everyone else and be tolerant and engage with them. Engagement through scholarly means is the most important message. That's what the Imams and that's what the Prophet, the family of the Prophet taught us. We heard of any conversation that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was involved in, or Imam Ali, where they were abusing or angered, or they pushed someone out. Imam Ali, even in the mosque dealing with Khawarij, who ultimately assassinated him, he allowed them to debate. Some of the Imam Ali's closest friends said, no, Khawarij, they are challenging you. Imam Ali said, no, they have a right to do that. The way Imam Ali gave a right to his staunch opponents is a lesson for all of us, because it is the only engagement and conversations and respect for the other which draws them in, helps you understand their perspective, you project your message to them. So that's an extremely important point and question that you've asked. I'm sorry, on some responses I went long, but I thought these ideas kept on flowing. Maybe it's the blessing of the name of Imam Ali that we're having this conversation.
No, this is perfect. And I think one thought just kept coming to my head, that is another way to engage with your faith is to have some of these intellectual discourses and conversations as well. So even the fact that people are on today and listening to you, I think that's also engaging with your faith. Dr. Abbas, I just want to make sure I come to like a unifying last minute thought, is that in my understanding and in my teaching, I sometimes use the equation faith equals belief plus action. So it's not only enough to believe that Imam Ali, it was the Prophet's heir. There's actions and there's rites and rituals and there's expressions of faith that come out of that understanding to showcase it physically. So lastly, can you just share quickly about the devotional pieces that are related to Imam Ali, and how do these connect all three communities together?
Terrific. And I think the inspiration for the ideas that connect everyone together is the love of Ahlul Bayt, which is incumbent upon us. That is the final message of the Prophet. And Imam Ali also, on his not on his deathbed, but the final moments, And this again is a statement that I borrow from sources which are both Shia and Sunni. In my book on Imam Ali, the Prophet said also, you'll find in the footnotes, which I want the reader to engage with to see on most things. I've given resources both for the Shia and Sunni. But I close with this on honoring what Anar has so rightly mentioned. The final words of Imam Ali to people around him before he passed away were these statements. He said to them, do not seek, it'll take a couple of minutes, do not seek this world even if it seeks you. Do not weep for anything that is taken away from you. Show compassion for the for the poor, speak the truth, hold fast unto the rope of God. This is the sentence relevant for which I'm reading this. Hold fast onto the rope of God and avoid discord. I heard the Prophet, Imam Ali said, the renewal of unity is better than all your prayers and fasting. The renewal of unity is better than all your prayers and fasting. Fear God with regard to those who have a right on you and your protection and your hospitality. Fear God with regard to the protection granted by your Prophet, and don't allow the dhimmis to be oppressed among you. Who were the dhimmis then? Christians and Jews. In his final moment, he's even concerned about them. He's even thinking about the unity of a community which involves Christians and Jews as well. Otherwise, why would he mention that? And his last words was, you must pursue harmony and generosity and avoid infighting, fraction, and fragmentation. I'm quoting the exact quote. I bid you farewell and mercy be upon you. That is the message of bringing everyone together and being open to everyone else. When you start looking for commonalities, you'll realize that 90% of these ideals are all very, very common to Shia, Sunnis, and Sufis. It's only the 10% where the approaches are different. Thank you.
Well, as we conclude, Dr. Abbas, do you have any final thoughts or ideas that you want to share with the audience?
I think this last quote, I really want people to read that again. I mean, this hits home this idea that Imam Ali is saying, pursue harmony and generosity. Generosity is also so critical. When you're generous to others, God is generous to you. Pursue harmony and generosity and avoid infighting, friction, and fragmentation. It's Islam as such, which is our identity. Everything else is secondary. If we are not clear on the main message, which brings every one of us together, then there's a high likelihood one can get distracted. And so these conversations, these ideas, and I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity. I know the larger Ismaili community had been extremely supportive of my book also. I learned from a friend on Instagram, they said they are regularly quoting your book. And I said, oh, what a great honor. And I continue to look for more interactions and more engagements and learn, and hopefully visit Ismaili Institute as well, which have greatly benefited from their works, and looking forward to interact with all of you. If you're in DC, if there's any other group conversations, I would be delighted to join and learn and share any ideas that I may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Abbas, and especially for all of your reflective thoughts. And I'm personally excited to see what your next book is going to be about on our amazing Hazrat Bibi Fatima Zahra. And with everything that's been spoken about, we have received a lot of questions from the audience, which I'm sure you'd love to hear your insights on. And with that, I'm going to turn to our first question. From your research, Dr. Abbas, how did Hazrat Ali reconcile the pain one suffers in an effort to protect the oppressed? Did he himself not become the victim?
Of course, I mean, that had a huge impact, because he had gone through these challenges himself, and that added another layer of understanding. And if he was acting as somebody who was very privileged, or someone who was as a ruler, or as someone who's superior, was distanced from the people, then his ideas, his teachings would not have had that kind of impact. So he was, even if he was a victim in a worldly sense, he never allowed that to influence his thinking. We know the famous case where we know in the Battle of Khandak, or the Battle of the Trench, where the enemy had spit on his face, and he stepped away. And he said, no, now, because what I'll do to him, or I can do to him, will have a personal revenge or personal anger involved. And that's not the purpose I have come to the battlefield. So he always was keeping a distance between what he was personally going through and his principles. It was his principles which mattered the most, and that's what we need to focus on as well.
Thank you for that. The next one I have is, why is there a lack of understanding regarding Imam Ali's identity as the Imam in Islamic history, despite the existence of the famous hadith?
It's partly, as I'd mentioned, distortion of history. Secondly, also, it is many people there among the Sunni as well. There's a school of thought called who believe in Tafsil Ali, which means that they say that yes, the political realities were such. The caliphate went to Abu Bakr, Usman, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Usman, but it was Ali who was very clearly above them in terms of his spiritual status and his caliber and his rank within the Islamic thinking, or within the Islamic jurisprudence, and within the Islamic, you would say, the system at that time. So it is very clear that the deviance happened more because of Muawiyah, and the way Muawiyah not only distorted religious traditions, but he had this factory of fake hadiths and fake sayings that were inculcated into the system. Also, many people don't realize that some of the original jurisprudence was the message, and the principles were coming from the family of the Prophet. There's a new book that has come out, which actually I'm just on the very final pages, by Hussain Mudarrisi on Imam Jafar Sadiq, published by Harvard University Press, and Hussain Mudarrisi is in Princeton University. An amazing book, which has changed many of my opinions, because I realized that all the great jurists among the Sunnis as well were borrowing from Imam Jafar Sadiq. So again, one point is the commonality of the idea. The other thing is those who wanted to create divisions knew that they can build their case around the sanctity of Ahlul Bayt. And as I had mentioned, the famous quote even of Man kunta Mawla fahaza Ali and Mawla, which has 110 narrators. Even someone can play games with those kind of hadiths, or ordinary Sunnis thinking that the most famous hadith is, I'm leaving behind the Prophet saying, I'm leaving behind you Quran and Sunnah, which is not mentioned in any of the Siyasat books. I mean, this requires reading. So it's about awareness also. It is about people, anything you find, go research yourself as well. Because Islamic history and the way the modern discourse, and especially with social media, the negativities coming out from those who want division, those who want distortion, those who want to bog Muslims down within Muslims, bog them down into irrelevant intricacies, are doing a great disservice. The only way to challenge them is by more education, more awareness, talking among each other, asking questions, and having an open critical mind, that I'm ready to think about the alternate idea. When an idea is pitched to me, let me think what is the counter argument. That Imam Ali had said in Najl Balagha, if you want to go deep into an idea, think through. Thinking through will lead us to truth in many cases.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Abbas. I think Dr. Seuss says it best, right? The more you know, the more you grow. And I think that really depends on how much you're reading, how much you're going out and being critical and inquisitive and trying to find some of these answers. So thank you. Another question that came out is, did you encounter any understanding of La Fatah illa Ali, La Saif illa Zulfikar as an inspiration to guide us in our current world?
Yes, it is. It is, and we know that this is, when I was trying to quote this in the book, this comes from so many the poetic narrations as well. This is mostly mentioned in the Urdu poetry and other places, or other than all the symbols we have. I wanted to look for the source, and I was fascinated to find that there are a couple of narrations. One is that this was actually, it came as a hadith Qudsi, which means that it came from God, but it is not part of Quran. That this was first mentioned by Jibreel, or Gabriel during one of the battles, the Battle of Ohud. The other narration is this came at the time of Heir. But these are all sources. These are beautiful narrations which give warmth to our heart, and which explains how different traditions among the Sunnis, Shias, Sufis mostly. I mean, we often, people try to discard Sufis, which I've learned it is because most traditions, including Shiism, if I may dare say, and the Sunnis, they're all kind of little insecure from the Sufis and the mystical tradition, because they think, oh, what if we lose people to that tradition? Well, these are all concentric circles. You cannot be a real Shia unless you're a Sunni, and you can't be a real Sunni without you're a Shia. And all these different traditions, I mean, I'm seeing also, I'm taking liberty to mention this lack of interaction among the Ismaili and the Isna Ashri and the Bohras within the Shias actually is very disappointing. And the more and more I learned about it, I'm quite surprised. Some of my actually first friends, the first time I had gone to a spiritual experience, a spiritual mystic event in Lahore, was through a friend of my sister's who were a Smiley family. And later on, some people said to us, why you went to a Smiley? We saw you in that gathering. You're not a Smiley. He said, that was one of the best events I had. So we talked about, I'm forgetting now which great personality of Islam, but it was so powerful. And so this often, when I ask among the Shia communities how much they interact, they know we all operate in our isolationary, if that's the right word, circles without interaction, learning from each other. And that's a pity. Sorry, I was distracted, but I think that's an important message.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That's very important. I think that we forget that there's other communities out there that have similar expressions of faith as well that you can engage in together. I have one more question. Dr. Abbas, how is it possible that despite the existence of examples such as Bibi Fatima and Hazrat Ali that demonstrate the equality of men and women in early Islam, that there have been significantly fewer female scholars throughout Islamic history?
I think that is the bias of the initial years, which was that the male chauvinism was so entrenched in a way. I mean, for instance, I was reading that Bibi Salma, one of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was initially in initial days of Islam was tasked to actually reach out to all women, and if anyone is shy, she would even ask them questions or actually bring them in presence of the Prophet. How many mosques today would allow men and women to sit together in front of them, right in front of each other, and have a conversation with the Imam? Very few. I mean, I have not seen that actually, unless there are these events at home. So it's partly cultural. Some of these cultural issues came on in the way. Secondly, this initially the madrasas and all the scholarship was linked to women, except in the Sufi tradition, which to give credit where due. We know that the oldest university in Fez, actually older than even Al-Azhar, the Fez University was built by Lady Fatima. Actually, I'm doing some research on that as well. She was, we don't know which tradition she belonged to. Most certainly she belonged to a tradition which is close to Sufism, and probably Shiism as well. But history is a bit vague on that. The point is, it is the cultural notions which came in the way. Otherwise, the references to Bibi Fatima Zahra and to Bibi Salma and others are very, very entrenched. The historian also, at times, if I may say with respect, on other wife of the Prophet, Bibi Aisha, the kind of the number of quotes that were mentioned, even though she was Prophet's wife for a very short time. Bibi Khadija was Prophet's wife for the longest time. There's no comparison in terms of time, and people forget when Prophet's first marriage had taken place and when she passed away and when other marriages happened. Most of the other marriages of the Prophet were during the last 5 to 7 years. These kind of entrenched, intentional distortions for political purposes also damaged or also became a hindrance in explaining the role of women in Islam. Most of the women, as I mentioned, the wives of some of the Imams, were teaching They were not teaching women only. I'm sure they were teaching, there were men sitting in front of them. How many of the Shia gatherings mention this fact that the wives of two or three of the most important, I'm talking more maybe on this Isnashi tradition, but the fifth Imam and the sixth Imam is accepted by all traditions in common. And if their wives were playing at such an important role as a scholar and as a teacher in the madrasa, which was only one madrasa of the family of the Prophet in Medina, why is that not mentioned and quoted so often? They must have said things which are never quoted. There's this. All sides are to be blamed in this.
No, thank you, Dr. Abbas, for enlightening us with that. I lied. Another like really hot question came in, so I'm going to ask it, and then we could do a quick one and then end. Your book began by highlighting roles of Abdul Muttalib and Abu Talib and being righteous men who prepared the Prophet for his mission. We've never seen a biography of the Prophet ever start this way. What gave you this awesome idea?
Say that one time ago. I think the internet connection weakened for a second. You can repeat.
Yes, the audience is asking, your book began by highlighting the roles of Abdul Muttalib and Abu Talib in being righteous men who prepared the Prophet for his mission. And we've never seen a biography of the Prophet start that way. What gave you this amazing idea?
Thank you so much. I was always thinking that all the other prophets that we hear about their stories are mentioning, whether it is about Ibrahim, Daud, Musa, Isa, everyone is part of this family and tradition of prophets. And how is it possible that the last of the prophet, the most magnificent prophet, the most beloved of God, was being taken care of by people who had not direct knowledge or information that in their house they'll be the final prophet? It is impossible. So I started digging into the stories, and when I found those, how some of the most important practices of Hajj today were even some of those were corrected by Hazrat Abdul Muttalib. The family knew what they were tasked to do. Thinking otherwise, I mean, this is also another, I would say, a challenging situation where, because of sectarian lens, because of only reading books when you're writing something of your own uh, leaders or your own spiritual experts from your own tradition, we all remain prisoned in our own narrations. In this case, some of these I found not from the mainstream books. These were from the books where one had to dig. One of the PhD documents I found on Bibi Fatma bint Asad, somebody did a PhD on her. And when I found that document, it was so insightful. Many of the stuff came from there. And also, I thought that to really link this Bani Hashim family and why the Prophet said, Ali is to me what Aaron was to Moses. There were so many reasons. He was a family member. There had to be a family connection. When Prophet was emphasizing Ahlul Bayt and emphasizing his family and Bani Hashim's centrality, Bani Hashim was supposed to be something very, very important in terms of their spiritual excellence. And this comes in the generation. So the Prophet's DNA also had a role to play because that was such a great spiritual connection. It was in search of that I found. And the other thing was, again, I give credit honestly to my wife. And this is not just in a customary sense. She kept on telling me, Hassan, all the books you have written are on extremism and militant groups and political science and politics of this versus that. Please think of this book as a story. Unless you can tell an authentic story, you'll not be able to do any service. And I thought of this project as the most important project of my life. And I thought I have to try to do justice to it in my humble way, because this will be something which may uh, get me through the most difficult of the stages in the next world. And luckily, it happened. I was trying to write this book for 4 or 5 years before that, or 3, 4 at least. It turned out it was meant to be written in a time when COVID started, when I had more time to sit together with the family. And their critique, initially, I thought, my wife is a Sunni. I mean, she doesn't know much about Imam Ali. Why is she saying that? She said, no, it has to be a book. And then she edited some of the chapters as well, especially the one, the fifth or sixth one. She said, no, you have not done justice to it. I'll rewrite it. So I was blessed, and I have to give credit to this to my family as well. On one last thing, on this time for my book on Bibi Fatma, I had to tell my editor, look, the one I wrote was, I had no idea how much support I'll get from the family. The book on Bibi Fatma Zara has to be a book co-authored with me and my wife, because without a woman and her understanding and her linguistic skills and her approach, I'll not be able to write about Bibi Fatima. I was just reminded of that. Thank you. Thank you for that question.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Baz. That was amazing. As much as I've loved listening to you today, I think I want to meet your wife one day as well. So please tell her salam from all of us and Yali Madad. But thank you,
Most
Dr.
welcome.
Baz,
Time,
for
all of it.
sharing your time with us today. And thank you, audience, for joining us today. As you can see, Dr. Abbas exudes love and light as he speaks, and that's very much an embodiment of what Ali teaches as well, Imam Ali. Hopefully this is just the start of the critical conversation that we're having. And today was such a treat for me, as I hope that it was for all of you watching. Thank you again. And a couple of announcements before we go. In the chat, you will find resources that are recommended by Dr. Abbas. We've got the book, The Prophet's Heir, The Life of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And of course, we've got The Return of the Taliban, Afghanistan After the Americans Left. We also have Dr. Riza Shah Kazmi's Justice and Remembrance, Introducing the Spirituality of Imam Ali. And then for the recording of this conversation and past conversations, please visit the Facets of Faith page on the Smiley USA. And the link for that should be in the chat as well. And then please look out for more information on the .smiley/USA webpage and social media pages for young adult conversations this week and our next critical conversation. A plug-in, I'm doing the next young adult conversation on May 9th, so please join me. And then lastly, as soon as you end, please take the survey at the end of the session that will pop up on your screen as you leave. Thank you, and Ya Ali Madad.